I am here today with Mr. Oliver Wakeman. Oliver is the eldest son of legendary Yes keyboardist Rick Wakeman. Oliver has followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a member of Yes and the Strawbs, and has had a long career as one of the world's most sought-after keyboard players. He has been nominated for the Classic Rock Society's Best Keyboard Player Award numerous times and has won the award 3 years in a row from 2006 to 2008. And on April 11th, he will release a 3-disc box set called Collaborations on Burning Shed Records. And Oliver, thanks so much for being here. I so appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
This box set, it's very, very special, very beautiful packaging. We have 3 discs here. And it's collaborations. So you've picked 2 of the greatest guitar players that I can think of to collaborate with Gordon Giltrap and of course Steve Howe from Yes. Tell me about this 3rd disc. That's the one that's really it's fascinating to me. Called From a Stage. Tell me a little bit about how that came about.
Well, the title From a Stage is a little bit of a play on the box set that I did with Yes a few years before that, which is called From a Page, and I thought From a Stage sounded like a nice cheeky line in. So
and it is.
Well, essentially what happened is that we Gordon and I started working together in 2012, literally just after I'd stopped working with Yes. He was the first person that called me up and said, would you like to work together on his new record? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And then he phoned me up the next day and said, actually, I've changed my mind. Would you work? Could we do a record together rather than you just play on my record? And I said, brilliant, love to. Mm-hmm. And so we started writing, and we wrote that record, which was Ravens and Lullabies, which is also in the box set. Every single way that you can write a record. We did it the old-fashioned way of the 2 of us sitting in a room, bouncing ideas off each other, sending files over the internet, almost singing melodies down the phone to each other. We did every single way we could. And what we decided to do was go out on tour before the record was released. Now, the record Ravens and Lullabies, the reason it's called Ravens and Lullabies is it's a split record. Half of them are acoustic duos that fit in between the more organic or band related type of songs. And basically the Ravens were the songs with lyrics that dealt with troubles, confusions, things that are going on in the world. And the Lullabies were the instrumental duets that were supposed to fit between, which was supposed to bring you sort of down, not bring you down, but a bit like when you cleanse your palate after you've had a piece of music that's quite intense and gives you a lot to think about. A nice gentle piece of music gave you a moment on the record to reflect, and then it would take you off again into the next piece. So we decided that actually we could go out and tour taking some of the Lullabies pieces. So we weren't actually doing just an acoustic version of the album. We were actually taking pieces that were genuinely exactly as they were going to be on the album on tour. So we went out on tour. And of course, whilst we were on tour, we developed these pieces of music as well, which was great. So we actually got to really work pieces of music up in front of the audience. Mm-hmm. So essentially, we did that tour in 2012, which went really well. The reception was remarkable. And I had a tremendous time, and Gordon and I got on famously well. And then 2013, the record came out. And so we did another tour to promote the record. And then what we started to do was as all bands do, once you start working together a lot, you start putting different pieces in and out of the show. And because we both have quite extensive back catalogues, we started to pick pieces from our back catalogues that we thought would work quite well. For example, I took one of the pieces that I did with Steve Howe on the 3 Ages record, which is also in this box set, and Gordon played the guitar parts. And I played on his very famous track, Heart Song, and we did a new version of his old classic Roots. And we had a very interesting show that was actually probably only a quarter of it was the material from the record we were out to promote. We had so much of a history to work through. And of course, we both quite like talking to an audience as well. We're not the sort of people that sit on stage and don't say anything. And the repartee between the 2 of us was very warmly received. And so that became an integral part of the show. So we ended up with this very record that was quite dark and quite lyrical songs, when you're dealing with troubles in the world, or stories that tell a story about somebody, they can be quite interesting, but quite dark at times, musically as well, when you're dealing with a full band. But the live shows had a real warmth to them, which was lovely. We had a lot of laughter on stage. The music was very beautiful. But then as we started to go forwards, we had a friend of ours, Paul Manzi, who sang on the Ravens record. He came along and joined us. He said to me, "Oh, I'm going to be in the area where you're playing." And I said, "Well, would you like to come and join us on stage?" So we had 1 or 2 shows over the whole 2-3 years that we toured together, where Paul would turn up and just sing with us. And of course, those nights we'd pick a whole new load of songs that we hadn't done before and say, "Hey, we've got an opportunity now. We've got a singer here." And so Paul would join us. And it was fortuitous that one of those nights, another friend of mine who I'd worked with for many years came along and said, "Hey, I'll do the mixing for you if you like." And I went, "Yeah, great. That'd be terrific." I didn't realize that he recorded the show. And then when I was coming up with the next idea for the next box set, because I did the From a Page, then I did Tales by Gaslight, which was a collection of all the music I did with Clive Nolan. And then we got to, when I was thinking about collaborations, I was thinking, I'd really like to do that, but I don't have anything else to add into that box set to make it special and unusual. And then this email dropped in my inbox that said, "Oh, I've got a multi-track of a concert you did with Paul Manzi. Do you want it?" And I was like, "Okay, thank you very much." And so that's where it started. So I had a whole show, and I spent quite a long time going through the bits, pulling out the tracks, not just the tracks that I thought were best, but the tracks that weren't repeats of what was already in the box set. So there's an awful lot of music on there from our history. A little bit of chat left. Obviously, you can't leave too much in on a live record.
Right.
But you really get the feeling of the warmth of the show. And that was really important with the, 3 Ages of very progressive instrumental album. Ravens and Lullabies is a rock record interdispersed with these little interludes of beauty. And then From a Stage is the warm live album. So that's how the third album came about. You'll find this a lot. You'll ask me one question, I'll probably answer about 12 of your next questions.
No, that is perfect, because that is, I heard that story and I said, wow, that's just, it is just perfect with these 2 records. Like you said, I mean, there is a contrast and there is a flow with these records. To have this special live performance that you didn't even know existed, to come up and be part of this is really a special thing. It really, really is. It's cool. The collaboration box set, these 3 discs, 16-page booklets, lyrics, artwork, and the first 250 signed art print. Just a beautiful package. Putting this together was it you came up with that idea, that concept of this, and
yeah. I have a 16-year-old son, and he often says to me, why did you write that song, Dad? And I'd always say, because nobody else has, and I wanted to hear it. So I would write music. And when I was growing up, so basically I'm a music fan as well as a musician. So I grew up listening to multiple different bands. I did the whole thing of putting the vinyls on the bed covers to look at the covers to see how they matched as a set. And I love that whole packaging thing. I love vinyl. I come from an age where CDs first started. My very first CD was Rush's Hold Your Fire. And my second one was Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers. I can always remember the first 2 CDs I ever bought. But I remember the love of album sleeves and actually thinking, okay, CDs are smaller than vinyl, but you get a lot of information in them because you've got booklets, you can do things with them. Right. And then I've seen that format sort of change over the years to CD books, digipacks, all that sort of stuff. And when it came to doing the box sets, I thought, I really want to make these special. I want to have that feeling that I used to get when I used to buy a really good record. And another little story is that when I was a kid growing up, my dad lived in Switzerland for many years, so I didn't see him for a long time. And then when I was about 13 or so, he came back to the UK. He was with his third wife at the time. And he was working for various record companies. And I can distinctly remember on at least 2 occasions, he would come into his office and he had these big brown parcels. And I said, what? We used to go and stay with him for the weekends. I'd say, what's that, Dad? And he'd say, "Oh, it's the new record." I said, "Oh, right. Can you have a look?" And he'd open it up and he'd look at it and he'd put it on the side. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he'd go, "Awful album cover again." He said, "Awful album cover," and walk out the room. And I remember thinking, how can you put a record out and not know what the cover's going to be? I was quite confused by that, because back in the day, of course, the record company controlled everything and they controlled all the bits, the artwork, the photographer, everything. Whereas I say newer musicians, I'm quite old now, but us musicians that maybe didn't have the advantage of record companies throwing lots of money around, we had to take a little bit more control of our work and actually make sure that our work was the best presented it could possibly be, because we're proud of our work and we want to present ourselves in a certain way. And also, I'm the same as everybody else. I'm a consumer. I don't like feeling that I've bought something and I'm not happy with it, or I feel like I've been shortchanged.
Right.
So, when I was putting these together, talking to the management company, and they were saying, like, "What else can we do?" And I said, "Well, let me speak to all the artists and let me see if they'll let me put an art print of the album sleeve without the logos and the title of the record on it, because I think that would be a nice thing in the books box set as well. You get your CD wallet, so you get little miniature record sleeves, and a 16-page booklet for each record, because I think that's important. And then I write about each record inside it and talk about all the songs. And then I thought, these little art prints. I mean, the last one I did, Tales by Gaslight, I put all the little art prints up here in a little frame. I sort of, I didn't draw them, but they're wonderful pictures and I like them, so I put them on my wall. And I thought that was a really nice thing to do. And I thought, I want somebody to open a box and go, "Wow, this is great. Look at all this I get," rather than I've just got, a jewel case with the song titles in it. I don't subscribe to that sort of release of music. I think it has to be an event, and I don't want people to sit and listen to the music, looking at the booklet, looking at the artwork, reading about it whilst they're enjoying it. I think it should be a thing that people feel proud or happy to have in their collection.
Well, I'm so enlightened to hear that too, because I am from that school. I remember pulling out records and reading the lyrics and reading the liner notes.
Yeah.
Who mastered the album?
Yeah.
Management, the thank you, all of that. That was all part of the event. It was part of the music. When I listen to those records now, all of that comes rushing back, the liner notes and everything along with the music. So it is really, it's incredible. And it's strange to think that your dad would pull out a Yes album cover and think it wasn't great.
It wasn't. I'll tell you, I'll put it. It wasn't a Yes one. It was one of his solo records.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'm good friends with Roger Dean. I would hate to think that.
Yeah. Anything that Roger Dean touches is pretty great.
It is pretty great.
Now, of course, when I introduce you as the eldest son of Rick Wakeman, and Rick Wakeman, to all of us out here, is just a godlike figure in progressive rock music, keyboard music. Being the son of Rick Wakeman, have you found it difficulty to be Oliver Wakeman, to find your own identity? Has that ever been a difficult thing?
I think it's probably got 2 or 3 different stages in it. When you're a kid growing up, you're kind of quite dwarfed by it, because it is just all encompassing. But I also, when I grew up, it was through a period of time in which Dad wasn't really, I'm not going to say he wasn't famous, but he wasn't in vogue. He wasn't the whole, I have to phrase this correctly. The nostalgia tours for bands didn't exist. I said in an interview the other day, I said nostalgia didn't exist, and that's rubbish, because nostalgia has always existed. It's just that the music tours hadn't come around to being that thing where older bands went out on regular things and people wanted to go and see them. Music was changing throughout the 90s, and he was just playing to his core fan base, right, and doing tours and making a living. But I remember sort of seeing him do lots of things, and so I sort of was aware that he was well known. But of course, there wasn't the internet. There wasn't all these things where you could see him everywhere. We had 3 TV channels in the UK. he might occasionally appear on the breakfast TV, and that would be it. So my awareness of his fame really sort of came through knowing that he'd sold lots of records. So as I was growing up, I was sort of aware of this, and I started to go and see a couple of Yes shows. And I went on the ABWH tour when I was about 16. I went around America with him.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing the size of the venues and going, okay, there's something going on here. And then people always talk to you and go, oh, you're Rick's son. And you go, yeah, great. And then he invited me along to some other things. He did some golf. He did some charity golf things. And I remember once he was still out on the course. He was supposed to be giving out the prizes or some presentation he was going to do. I remember the organizer coming up to me, and I must have been 16, 17. And he came up to me and he said, your dad's still on the golf course? And I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, he's supposed to be giving out the prizes. And I went, okay. He said, well, he's not back in time, and he's not going to get back. Could you give them out? And I said, why? He said, well, because you're Rick's son. And I said, well, what does that mean? Why does that make me somebody that is important enough to give something out to congratulate somebody else for some work they've done? Because I'm not there on my behalf. You're asking me to subs. It felt a bit odd to me, right. And it made me realize that actually, if I want to do something that not makes me different to Dad, but gives me a chance of my own identity, I have to do something, and it has to be me, and I have to do it. And for example, my dad and I have never played. We have played together on stage, but we didn't play together on stage until about maybe 15 years into my career.
Right.
And that was done deliberately because I didn't want to do it until I felt that I'd sort of earned my stripes and created a bit of my own fan base or my own respected people that liked what I did and would actually go, oh, Oliver's playing with Rick. That sounds a cool thing to go and see, not just Rick's on stage with his son. That was right. It was important to me to be like that. And maybe nobody else thinks like that, but for me as a musician, that was important to me. That was massively important that I felt, right. So I sort of went through being a kid, not really knowing about it, growing up, had to, be myself and do what I do. And then people go, well, that's a really interesting meld. And then later on in life, when I got to join Yes and the Strawbs, I think that the nicest thing is that I always sort of thought, well, being Rick's son maybe opened the door or made people aware of me. But just the name doesn't keep the door open. If I got up on stage and hit every single note wrong and was an annoying person and people didn't enjoy working with me, the door would close pretty quickly after that. So you sort of realize that, so I was always very proud of the fact that the job offers from Yes and from the Strawbs actually came to me. I never courted that work. Mm-hmm. I never said to them, oh, if you have any keyboard player, give me a call. It was, I just never did that. I'd worked with Steve Howe. We'd become friends. And he phoned me up out of the blue one day and just said, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to think about it. And that's when I joined Yes. And the same thing happened with Strawbs. They said, well, look, we know you're on tour with Yes, but we would really like a keyboard player. We want to go out and play some of the more complicated stuff that we did with the Strawbs that we haven't been able to do because we haven't had keyboard players who play in that sort of style. Would you like to join? And so that to me was real. That sort of epitomized everything that I'd looked for, which was I'd actually had a reputation that people knew that they could trust me to do a job. Yeah. And so that's when I sort of really started to feel that I actually had my own identity. So a very long-winded answer again, I'm afraid, but it does explain that feeling of trying to come out of a shadow and create your own identity whilst doing a similar sort of thing to the person's whose shadow you're trying to get out of.
Yeah, and you've done incredible things as Oliver Wakeman. You are just an incredible player. And I think about that, and it just seems like it's in the blood, kind of thing. A lot of people would think that you were taught by your dad, just from the way you play. But that's not really the case, is it? He didn't have that much of a hand in teaching you the keyboard.
No, not at all. He left home when I was five or six. I went to piano lessons. I distinctly remember the first time I played a piano. I was about 4. We had a big grand piano in our lounge. I walked up to it and I put my fingers up on the keys and went like that and hit the keys. And somehow I hit a perfect chord. I hit the first, third, and the fifth, and the root note, and it sounded great. And I went, "Well, this is easy."
Of course you did, right? We would expect that.
Yeah, and then pressed it again, and of course, the second time I pressed it, I wasn't so fortunate, and it sounded awful. And I thought, "Oh, there's something wrong here." So I pressed it again, and it was still awful. And then I sort of thought to myself, "Oh, I'm going to have to learn how to do this properly. Then I can't just guess my way through this." And so from about the age of 5, I started doing lessons. And I did the traditional thing that all people do as they get older when they're doing music. They stop and they start and they get interested in girls and they get interested in football and they get interested in other things. And then I started to learn the guitar and did all those sort of things. But piano was always my love, and I'd always find myself going back to it. And I just kept playing and playing and playing and enjoying it. And I just joined. I remember a bit of one thing my dad always said, which he did when he was growing up, which was play with anyone and everyone and anything, wherever you can when you're learning. And so I joined blues bands, trios, duos, house bands, function bands, playing all the hits of the day. I played everywhere, anywhere, original bands, and I loved it. And that was sort of part of my apprenticeship, as it were, just to play with loads and loads of people. I've probably veered completely off what your original question was. So is it about playing ability?
How you learned? Yeah,
how I learned. Yeah, good. I am answering the right question.
Yeah.
So I told you I do this. So I'd sort of done classical lessons, and I even went back to classical lessons when I got a bit older to just sort of reaffirm my technique, and I still do, my scales and all the bits and pieces to keep myself, fluid, and all the training you're supposed to do. But I didn't want to be just a classical player, and I probably suffered with exactly the same thing my dad suffered with when he was at the Royal College of Music, which was he wanted to do different things. And I realized quite early on that I wanted to write. And so I started writing. And of course, as I wrote, I realized that the things I wanted to write needed to sound a certain way. So it involved a certain amount of technical ability to do the things that I wanted to hear in a song. And so I did that. But the other thing I always did, I was always very fortunate, or whether I did it subconsciously, I always played in bands with people that were older than me. And by doing that, you don't have that advantage of being the youngest person in, say, an office where everyone goes, "Oh, sorry, I'll look after you, I'll help you." When you're the youngest person in the band, you are potentially the weakest link. So you work harder to try and keep up with the people that are older than you. And also they've probably learned a lot more than you. So you learn from them quickly, and you suddenly realize that actually I can't muck around with like my mates from school. I've got to be on the ball here. And I learned at a very early age about actually it's a good grounding to understand other instruments. So I would get on stage with the jam band and I could just sort of fudge my way around a couple of chords, but all the time I'm looking at the guitarist, I'm looking at the bass player, and I'm watching where his fingers are going, and I'm going, "Oh, okay, third time round on the turn, he's hitting an F sharp. Okay, remember that next time round." And okay, what's the drummer do? Oh, he's doing an offbeat there, right? Don't get distracted. And you learn how to absorb all this information that's coming to you from all these other musicians. So it was never just about being able to play. It was about actually being able to play with other musicians. And something Steve Howe said to me, he said, one of the things that's great about being in a really good band, and yes, we're really good at this, is that the keyboards and the guitars can either work together very intricately, or they let one of the instruments take the solo and the real front thing, while the other one jumps back into the rhythm section and joins with the bass and the drums and becomes a real groove. And that's just as important to give the bassist to the person that's out the front that's taking the highlight at that moment. And I think that growing up and playing in all those different bands and learning how to be part of an ensemble and how to read how different musicians are playing was equally as important as the sort of training that I did as well. And I distinctly remember being in studios with musicians that I remember working with a violinist many years ago who was a phenomenal violinist. She was just amazing. Until I turned around and said, "Could you play a solo for me?" And she was like, "I've got no idea how to do that." I said, "Well, you can play everything. I've seen you play everything. Can you not come up with a solo?" She said, "What now?" I said, "Yeah." She went, "I wouldn't know where to start." So I had to write it for her, I had to score it for her. And then she played it beautifully. And it suddenly made me realize that actually, as musicians, we sort of go up a tree trunk. And as long as we all get to a certain technical level, then we all branch off into different parts of the musical world. And just because somebody does this brilliantly doesn't mean they do what you do brilliantly. And it means that everybody is unique in the musical world. Once they get to a certain point, it's not, oh, you're better than him or he's better than that. It's just you do something different to what somebody else does because the route you've taken. But the route that I've taken has always involved that excitement that I get from an instrument being pushed a little bit or the technicality pushed a little bit. I get a bit excited by that sort of thing, whether it's me doing it or listening to somebody else do it. You know, I listen to someone else do something really clever and it's like, oh, well, actually, what are you doing? Oh, actually, like that. You know, it's that sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
But, you know,
And we get excited listening to that kind of stuff. I know I do, like progressive rock and you know, the classical, it's so intricate and you know, I mean, there's so much to it. And you mentioned that playing with different people who do different things. I think that's so much of band chemistry. You know, you have players who play a certain way. They don't all play the same way, but they gel together.
yeah.
That's a really special thing that all the great bands have, I think. The new collaborations box set, Gordon Giltrap, Steve Howe, you have playing. Do you write or play differently depending who is in that role? When you were, you know, when you were writing for it, you know, or even the performance, do you look over and say, "There's Gordon, I need to play a certain way," or do you just play the way you know how to play?
God, it's a really good question. I've never really thought of it like that. I think with the Three Ages record, which is all instrumental, and that was like my third album, and I listened to it obviously when we did the remasters for this box set, and in an odd sort of not patting yourself on the back sort of way, I listened to it and went, crikey, that's really intricate for someone that was quite young at the time. I mean, I was quite young when I started. It came out when I was about 27, 28, I think, but I was actually quite young when I started writing the music for it because it was a slow burn record. And I remember listening to it thinking, God, that's really, but it was obviously influenced by the music that not that I was listening to, but the music that I'd been inspired or enjoyed listening to. So there was quite a lot of classical, long form, bombastic music on there, a lot of keyboard stuff going silly and me showing off and doing all the daft things. And but Steve was quite instrumental in pulling that album together because we had met each other on the ABWH tour. I'd known Steve since I was a kid, but as a kid of his bandmate, you know, he was like, "Oh, hello, Oliver, how are you? You know, you're four toddling around the place,
Right.
falling off a bicycle. They're great." But when I got into my 20s and when I was 16, 17, and we went around tour with ABWH, they Tony Levin got ill and the tour stopped. And so they decided to go into the studio to record the single version of the track I'm Alive, which was from the AWH album, which is a slightly different arrangement to the record version because it was a one track off of a 4-track suite. So they needed to make it sound like an individual track. And I remember going into the studio and Steve was there and he had his, I think it was a Steinberger guitar, the little headless guitar with a very small body. And he was doing all the guitars on that. And we just got talking and spent a lot of time just chatting and talking. And, you know, I really enjoyed his company. I distinctly remember in the same studio, Dylan Howe, Steve's son, the drummer, was there talking to Bill Bruford and learning jazz drums. And I remember looking, thinking, this is really weird. Dad's not even here. I'm talking to the guitarist, and the guitarist's son is talking to the drummer. This is a really, really weird scenario. Anyway, Steve and I got friendly, and you know that it sort of finished at that. And then one day, this is a really bizarre story. I'd released my first. I was hitchhiking around the UK, and I ended up at a train station where a friend of mine had given me a train ticket that had got me part way to go to see my mum, and I was going to hitchhike the rest of the way. And I got off the train, and on the platform was Steve Howe waiting to pick up his son. And I walked over, and I hadn't seen him for like 10 years. And I went over and said, "Hi, Steve, it's Oliver, Rick's son." And he was like, what are you doing here? I said, I'm going to see my mum. And it turned out they lived like 20 miles away from each other. And so he gave me a lift part of the way there. And he said, oh, here's my number. You must give me a call at some point. And then I started working in a radio station. And so I interviewed him for the radio station. He invited me over to his house. And then we suddenly ended up becoming buddies. And I would go over and chat to him, and he'd talk to me about his latest records, and we listened to music together. And then one day I bumped into him in the local town, and I just released my first record. And somehow he caught me just at the point I was outside the record shop. And I was stood fortuitously right in front of the poster of my record that was in the record shop window. And he said, what have you been up to? And I went, oh, this. And he went, oh, great. So I went in and got him a copy and gave him a copy. And he said, oh, I'll have a good listen. I'll give you a call. And I thought, yeah, you won't, because you're just being polite. You're not going to listen to the record. You're going to put it on your shelf. And but a week later, he phoned me up and he said, you got some time? I said, yeah. He said, I'd like to talk to you about your record and go through it with you. And I was like, really? And he, yeah. He said, so track one, I really like the use of this and that. And he talked me through each track. And I thought, that was really nice. He said, look, come over, keep coming over and seeing me. And so I'd go over and he'd say, do you want to play me anything else? Do you want to play me other bits and pieces that you've done? And I would go over and take him bits and pieces that I was working on. And he would go, that's a really nice piece. You've got really something special there. Or actually, that piece you just played me there doesn't really fit with the last few pieces you've played me. If you're going to keep something together, I would keep those three. And eventually over these sort of like evening chats that we would have in his old farmhouse, which was incidentally the farmhouse that they did all the rehearsals for the Yes album in many years ago. So it's a lovely historical place to go. And so the music, to answer your question, which is about, do I play differently for these people? It's more that the music, I didn't play deliberately. It was just that the music that he felt joined together was music that he felt he connected with. And so when it got to a certain point with the record, he said to me, because originally he said, well, let's do a record together at some point. And he was so busy with Yes and so busy doing his solo stuff. And he said to me one day, he said, look, I just can't commit to doing a record with you because I'm just not going to have the time. And I said, oh, that's a shame. And he said, but I think what you've got coming together here is a basis of a really good record. He said, and I would like to be an executive producer on it. He said, I would like to help you oversee the record. He said, not be a producer that sits in the studio and says, like, this type of drum sound, I think you want to do this, I want this, we'll get these people in. He said, I want to sit sort of above that and advise on the feel and the theme and help you get the best out of yourself for this record. And I said, lovely. And he said, and if I see a spot that I think needs a bit of guitar, I'll add a bit of guitar to it. I said, well, that's terrific. I can't ask for more than that. And as this went on, he ended up playing on more and more and more of the record and ended up on, I think, 11 of the 13 tracks he plays on. And became very integral to the whole sound of the record. And then, so he would say to me, like, I'd maybe do a keyboard solo, and he'd say, too early for a solo there. And I'd say, what do you mean? He'd say, no, we need to build that song more. We need to define the themes. We need to get the audience with us and bought into the music by that point before you start taking them on an improvisation area. And so he didn't change my playing style, but he changed the delivery of how the piece of music would come. And occasionally we disagreed, and I'd say, actually, no, I don't agree that should go around 3 times. I think 2 times is right. And maybe that guitar line you've put in there doesn't quite work. And so that album came around very organically that way, almost how I imagine 70s albums were done. It wasn't sitting in the studio. It wasn't sat at Pro Tools, moving things around and tidying everything up. It was, and one of the pieces, The Forgotten King, came about because he said to me once, he said, come over tonight, come play me some latest stuff. I put a cassette together of all the bits and pieces. This was obviously 2001, 2000. So this was sort of like pre-CDs even, of burning CDs. So it's a cassette. And I put it on my sideboard at home. And I had the piano in the car. And my electric piano was in the car because I think I was doing a show the next day and I'd loaded up the car in advance. And I drove out to his house. And he said, brilliant, come in, have a cup of tea. And he said, where you got the cassette of the music? And I went, yeah. It's on the sideboard at home. And I'd forgotten it. And he said, oh, I said, it's really annoying because I wanted to play you a particular piano piece. He went, oh, that's a shame. He said, did I see the piano in your car though? I went, yeah. He said, oh, bring that out, plug it in and play it to me. And it was like, okay, so I'm going to play you a piece I haven't actually played live or anywhere else before. I remember dragging the piano in and going, okay, it's this sort of thing. And I played it to him. And he went, do that again, do that bit again. And he walked into his back room, came out with this beautiful classical guitar, and we just started jamming. And that piece was the piece that probably, for me, defined the album, because it was so utterly organic. It was arranged and written in his room, in the house that they arranged the Yes album. And it was like, that's lovely. And so that was quite a moment. And that to me has always defined that album in the writing of it. Whereas when we moved on to working with Gordon, I was in a different place musically, because I had done those sort of over the top albums with Steve. And I'd also discovered songwriting with vocals and lyricists. I'd done 2 big rock opera albums with Clive Nolan. I'd done a rock album, Mother's Ruin. I'd done the live DVD, which was with my rock band. I'd done a couple of new age records, and I had done a couple of instrumental records as well. And so when it got to working with Gordon, I had all this experience. And of course, I'd just come off of 3 or 4 years of working with Yes and recording with Yes, even though that music didn't see the light of day for many years later. And I felt much broader as a writer than I was when I did the 3 Ages, because it was my 3rd record. And I put all my ideas into this instrumental thing. Whereas the record with Gordon, I knew that there was all this other experience I could draw from, lyricists, that sort of stuff. I could write lyrics now. But the other thing that I noticed was that Gordon had been an acoustic player for many, many years, whereas he was really well known in the 70s for being an electric player. But over the years, as a lot of musicians have done, the audiences have become smaller, or they've become more select, or he has his core fan base. And he'd gone back to playing acoustic because he knew he could entertain an audience with an acoustic guitar for an evening. And that was his show, and that's how he worked. Mm-hmm. But I knew that if I wanted to introduce him back into the progressive world, I was going to have to pull him into electric playing again, because he hadn't really played electric for many years. But I also knew we had to make sure his existing fan base weren't upset by the fact he wasn't doing acoustic. So that's why we sort of ended up with some acoustic tracks as well. So that album, it probably didn't change my playing style. It changed my composing style, because of the way that we were building the albums. And that's a very long-winded way of giving you the answer that you were looking for.
Yeah.
But it really was an album based on experiences learned and understanding more about the audience that you're trying to appeal to. And I knew that 3 Ages, with a big over-the-top synths, over-the-top Moog solos, intricate pianos, classical guitars, Steve Howe playing violins, whistles, that has that big 70s sort of solo album sort of concept-y sort of feel to it. Right. The record with Gordon was a different beast, but still had more modern influences to it, but was still, very progressive, very rocky, radio friendly in places, and also pieces that you can, listen to gently as well on some headphones and just enjoy the intricacies. Yeah. Does that answer the question? I know I sort of
it does. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, and I so appreciate it. You mentioned composing. Your song titles, Forgotten King, The Enchanter, The Fairy Ring, Ages of Magic. These are all folklore, fantasy. Is that when you're composing, do you go to a certain place that is fantasy? Do you like to be in that place when you compose?
It depends. I think with 3 Ages, I realized that I wanted to do something that actually had a theme about it, because the albums I did with Clive Nolan, which were either side of that record, were based on Jabberwocky and the Hound of the Baskervilles. So they were big stories through composing from start to end, big stories all the way. But I knew that I wanted to do a concept album as such with 3 Ages of Magic, but I didn't want to do just an instrumental album that started and finished an hour later. But I also knew that, Dad had done so many of the big stories that I thought, well, if I just straight away after having done Jabberwocky and Hound and try and do another one straight in between that's on my own that's different, it won't feel right. So I wanted to find a different route. And at the time, I lived in North Devon, which is in the west coast of England, which is a lovely folklore area. And so there are loads and loads of stories and little fisherman tales and stories about that sort of stuff, that are sort of small little bite-sized stories that have passed down through the generations over the years.
Sure.
And I suppose I started to write about those. I would get a paper cutting. In fact, I knew lots of people in the town because I played in the bands all over the place, and I'd get talking to people and say, I'm going to do this record and it's going to be on folklore and this sort of stuff. And I'd do a gig and someone would come up to me at the end of the show with a piece of paper, and I'd say, what's that? And say, oh, I cut this out of the newspaper for you. It's an article on crop circles. I thought you might be interested in it. And I've still got the folder somewhere in one of these cupboards, and it's just full of all the books and papers that people took out of magazines and gave to me. The Forgotten King, for example, is a perfect example. Where I lived in North Devon, to get to the beach, to get to the sea, you had to go down a road. And there was one road that had a really, really sharp 90-degree corner, which lots of people had accidents on because it was so sharp and they'd taken it too fast. And it was always referred to as Bloody Corner. People say, oh, if you go down Bloody Corner. And I always thought it was called Bloody Corner because the accidents, because it was such a sharp turn. And somebody said to me, he said, no, you want to go down there, go to the bush behind the apex of the corner and have a look. And one day when I was driving down there, I remembered this, and I stopped the car and I went over to look, and there was this plinth, this stone plinth that had been there for maybe 800 years or something. And it said, on this spot, I think it was King Hubba was slain. And it was a Viking, a Danish king had been, it was the site of a battleground. And he'd been killed on this spot, this corner of a very old track, when it was a battleground like 800 years before.
Wow.
And I thought, blimey, he was a king. He died here and he's completely forgotten.
Yeah.
His only memory is behind an overgrown bush. And that's where the track The Forgotten King came from, because it was like the closest piece of folklore to me. And those sort of things really inspire me. So Three Ages is full of that sort of story. The Whale's Last Dance is based on an article about a whale that got washed up on a beach, and there's a whale bone that is on the top of one of the beaches, and it washed up about 90 years ago. It was washed up on this beach, and they kept one of the pelvic bone on the top of the cliff. And then, of course, you see stories about these other whales that were beaching themselves. And I thought, the Whale's Last Dance, it's almost like they dance and they get beached, and it's a sad ending, but it is part of their life journey, is that often whales end up beaching themselves. And so they all came from these sort of stories of that I'd read or heard. Whereas the Ravens and Lullabies record came out of me leaving Yes. And there's certain songs on there, like Money Factoring, which was based very much on the fact that there were a lot of people out there that seemed to be earning an awful lot of money at the expense of an awful lot of other people. And so that's where the Money Factoring track came from, which was, skilled workers get turned away. So lyrically, I was sort of picking up on things that were going on around the world. And it was around the financial crash. And it was around a lot of people getting away with stuff, and other people, taking the brunt. And I'm not throwing any blame or pointing fingers at anybody, but I'm just saying, you see people losing their livelihoods through something that is absolutely nothing to do with them. And I felt I wanted to talk about that musically, not to, throw anything at anybody, but just say, this is something I've observed, and it felt something that I wanted to write about. And there's another track on there called Is This the Last Song I Write, which is the long epic on the album. And that came very much out of leaving Yes. And, obviously when you're in a band like Yes, and over the years, I built up a profile, and, you often got to have your music released. And obviously with Yes, I was released, playing to large audiences and meeting lots of people. And suddenly when that finished, you have a real crisis of confidence. And it was like, can I still write? Can I still do this? Is there, there's a line in there that said, will anybody will there be anybody waiting for me at the stage door? It's all this confidence that musicians go through. They see us on stage and go, God, they must be the most confident people in the world. But a lot of musicians have the same, particularly if you're a musician that maybe doesn't have the financial backing behind you, you have that same vulnerability that everybody else has, that, you hope that this well of creativity doesn't dry up, because it's the only thing you've got that keeps you propelling your life forwards. And so it was a piece of music about the panic of running out of ideas. And so that was a really important song. It was almost like a cathartic song for me. It actually allowed me to work through that fear of never writing again. And another track, Credit Carnival, for example, came from walking around a casino one night after a Yes show. I was walking around the casino, had my phone on me, and I was just writing words down. I was writing a story about a person that sits there and has been, gambling without telling anybody, and they're desperate to get that last win to get themselves back on track so they can walk out. And I wrote this whole story in my phone, and I only found it one day when I was in the studio thinking, oh, what do I want to write about? What do I think about? And I was just flicking through my phone, and I found I'd written this whole story about this thing, and there was all the lines in there. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then some of the music ideas came, and I'd thrown a few bits together for when I was with Yes. And it was like, that's great. And From the Turn of a Card was another different writing track that was written on Benoit David's guitar when we were on tour with Yes. When we were recording the Yes album that became From a Page, we were all in Los Angeles writing. And Benoit and I shared an apartment while we were over there, because we were going to the studio every day. And we were both the new boys in the band. So both our wives were back in different countries. And we thought, it's all right, we'll share an apartment and hang out together. And Benoit can teach me how to cook, because I'm a dreadful cook. And as my wife will also back up massively. One day he said, oh, I'm going back to Canada for a week. We're having a week off. He said, I'm going back to Canada and see my kids and my wife. But the trouble is, for me and Steve Howe, is that our families were in England, and it was too far to go all the way back to the UK. It'd take a day or so to travel there, a day or so to get over the jet lag, 2 days at home before you have to do the whole thing again and then come back to work. So we said, we'll stay. And Benoit left his guitar behind, and I just started writing this song about somebody had talked to me about card readings, and I just wrote this little piece about card readings. And then I played it to the rest of the band, and I played it on a guitar to them, and they was like, oh, this is great. Yeah, we've got to do this song on the record. And of course, when I left the band, it didn't happen. Right. And then it ended up on the Ravens and Lullabies album, and actually, coincidentally, it then ended up back on the From a Page record as well. So 2 completely different records, but somehow they sit together in this box set through a shared journey. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. It's
beautiful. I mean, it's lovely, and this, we get this with the box set too. These wonderful stories. I mean, the songs take on new meaning when you get the context, when you get that story. It's beautiful the way you compose, and what you're compelled to write by. It's fascinating, really is.
It's really interesting as well, because I write the songs for what I think, and it's amazing. Even as another song I wrote, I think it was Manufacturing off of Ravens and Lullabies. Mm-hmm. My wife came up to me the other day and said, oh, it's about this, isn't it? And she talked about something, and I said, no. She went, well, of course it is. So just listen to it. I said, well, I don't have to listen to it. I wrote it. I know what it sounds like. But that's not what I wrote it about. And she said, oh, well, that's what I hear in it. And of course, you remember that everybody listens to something and takes something slightly differently, or interprets it differently based on the experiences that they've had throughout their lives. So someone might take a song like Manufacturing and really take it to heart, almost in an anger way, because they've gone through that situation of losing a position. Whereas someone else might have a broader view and see it as a global problem. And that's why love songs work, isn't it? Because everybody thinks, they wrote that for me, right. because everybody's gone through those situations. And that's essentially what I think is the essence of a good song, is something that's trying to tell a story that will connect with somebody else, or somebody else connects in it in a way. And the best thing that I always loved about being a musician is the fact that something I've written can be helping somebody or having an emotional reaction with somebody somewhere else in the world and I'm not around. It could be making somebody feel happy. It could be making somebody feel sad. It can be comforting somebody if they're going through something, upsetting. It could just be something they're sitting down listening to and it's making them feel warm, inspiring them. So the idea that music can do this is what drives me as a musician. And I explained this to my son. I said, it's not about how much money you earn or, how many people know your name. It's about writing something that you think needs to be said or is you think people will enjoy. And I said, I will keep playing the piano whether anybody ever wants to listen to me ever again. I said, it's about being an artist and wanting to create something and, make the world a slightly nicer place because of it.
And you have, my friend, you have.
That's very kind of you.
Very much so. Now, I know you, in the past you've done corporate jingles and things like that, and some work for television. But I came across a video of you writing for a children's book, Yendor.
Oh, yes.
And you seemed enamored by the whole process of, putting emotions to sound, which was just a beautiful thing to watch. It was really precious. And being a children's book, it's just that much more precious. Would you like to do more of that kind of thing in the future?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm doing the follow-up one, actually. They're doing another Yendor film.
Okay.
So I'm doing the music for that as well. That sort of came around. That's a film by Rodney Matthews. A lot of your listeners and readers will know Rodney Matthews, who did all the album covers for such great bands like Praying Mantis and Bo Hansen and Magnum. Did some amazing imagery, and I've been very, very fortunate to count Rodney as a very good friend. And I know lots of people in the music industry say, "Oh, so it's a really good friend of mine, a really lovely friend of mine." But Rodney genuinely is a really good friend of mine. We live about half an hour away from each other. I worked on his Trinity record with him. We did a couple of Christmas singles together, and we often just catch up and just sit and talk about music, or I go over and we just have a cup of tea in his kitchen and whatever. And but he was working on this children's book, and he said to me, "So we're going to do an audio book of it. We're going to sort of read it, but what we could really do with is some sort of jingly bits that go in between the occasional bit of reading." I went, "Oh, okay, yeah, I can do that for you." And I put the phone down and I thought, I hate it when audiobooks do that. When an audiobook sort of, they do a load of reading and then it stops and you go, this piece of music goes dum diddly dum 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 dum, and then it goes, and then John walked through the door, and then they just start reading. There's a real disconnect between this sort of token bit of music that doesn't have enough time to develop into anything and sort of sets the scene but doesn't really. And Rodney phoned me up and said, "We need about 3 or 4 of these. Could you do them for us?" And I said, yeah, I'll do them for you. And then I sat down and I had the book that they were doing, which is what they were going to animate, and I looked at the book and thought, actually, there's so many different characters here. What would be really good would be to write a theme for each of the characters, and then find a way of joining it all together as you go through each page and the story. And so I sort of imagined it as a film in my head. And they kept phoning me up saying, so Oliver, we don't mean to be rude, but it's only about 2 minutes worth of music. Have you done it yet? Because we really need it. And I said, just give me another day. And about a week and a half later, I think they phoned me up one day and just said, "Look, just send us what you've got, because we've got to go with it. So send it just." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to send you something. And I'm going to get off the phone and I'll wait to hear from you." And I sent them the whole soundtrack. And
Wow.
I waited for the phone, and the phone rang about half an hour later. And I went, "Hello." and they basically said, "What have you done?" And I said, "If you want the other stuff," I said, "I can do that for you." I said, "This is just what I heard and what I got from reading your book and how I imagined it would work in a film." And they said, "We love it." it's actually, we're going to go and do the film. We have to do the film now. You know, the soundtrack has inspired the film rather than the other way around. And so they ended up working this film. Obviously, I'd make a few amends musically, but we actually did, you know, so the film came out with this whole story musically attached to it. And so I loved it. I was so excited to do it. And I was very grateful. It won a couple of soundtrack awards and things, which was really, really pleasant. But it's music and the spoken word is such a powerful tool. It's such a wonderful medium for telling a story. I mean, I've done some other music in the past, which has been music with poetry readings, which I did for the BBC and a few other places like that. And I did it for the Remembrance Day for the Poppy Appeals.
Yeah.
I did some music for one of those CDs, and I remember thinking, it's music just adds so much to the emotion that the human voice can carry, not just sung, but when it's, you know, when it's spoken word with really nice music behind it, can be so powerful.
Yeah.
And the idea of doing this for this film was just, you know, it was great. And so I can't wait to do the next one. And I've been asked to do a couple of other things as well. So yeah, if something inspires me or makes me get excited, it's almost like I can't wait to get started.
Yeah.
It's that sort of feeling.
And that's a great feeling, you know, rather than, you know, maybe the corporate jingle where, you know, you're doing that little 10-second bit where, you know, that's what they want, you know. But like you say, having that kind of power behind the music to blend with the voice is brilliant. If you could have a conversation with one person, one living person, who would that be?
Crikey, one living person, musically or anyone?
Anyone, really. Yeah.
I mean, I've been very fortunate, because a lot of the people that I would like to have spoken to, I've been very fortunate to actually have met, and a lot of them to count as friends. So I'm always sort of very, 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 you know, very, very blessed to have that sort of thing. Because I've always been a great lover of artists, really good artists. I mean, like Roger Dean, there's Anne Sudworth, who did the cover for my Three Ages cover. I'm very good friends with Anne. And so artists are always very, very important. A great fan of comedians as well. I suppose if I sort of think of some people that have actually sort of affected me throughout my life and kept me sane at various times, I'd probably quite like to sit down and have a chat with Kelsey Grammer from Frasier.
Okay.
I was a big fan of the Frasier TV series, and I think I'd quite like to sit and have a chat with him. And John Cleese, I think would be very nice. Stephen Fry, I'd like to sit down and have a chat with. I think people that have a real sense of history about them. They've actually really, they haven't just done one thing with their life. They are sort of multifaceted. They've done so many different things, and I imagine they would be really interesting people to sit and talk to. Right. And they're all very intelligent people as well. And so, you know, you learn an awful lot as well. I think it's probably not the answer you're looking for, was it? You're probably expecting me to say somebody really profound or something.
No, you know, and when I ask that question often to certain people, but for you, like you said, you've met so many people in the music world, especially that are attuned to what you do.
Yeah.
And, you know, with your upbringing and, you know, having Rick Wakeman as your father, you know, you've been exposed to so many people that, you know, that are just legendary. So, you know, I was really interested to see where you would go with that. That is not what I expected, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. They just are good comedians. I mean, I love, you know, I'm like anybody. I like a good film and I like a good TV series, but I don't get an awful lot of time to sit down and watch those. Right. But I can watch a comedy over and over again because I've seen it so many times. I just almost enjoy it like an audio play. I don't even have to watch it anymore. I can just have like Frasier season 1 going all the way through to season 10 over a 2-month period, just on, and just know exactly what's going on in it and just enjoy it. And I think I love it. And there are so many good comedies and things that are sort of not as well known that I love just as much. I'm a real sucker for finding a comedian or somebody who's done something that I enjoy, and then sort of almost tracing their family tree back, every bit of work they've done, and seeing their journey in the same way that I love watching how musicians have created their journey. You know, when you look at,
Right.
you know, I'd say Deep Purple right back to the first thing when they did Hush and had Nick Simper and stuff in the band, all the way through to Steve Morse and Don Airey playing. You sort of look at that whole journey that somebody takes. And I do the same with a comedian. I mean, like Simon Pegg is probably very well known to a lot of people in America for the Star Trek films and things. But I remember watching Simon Pegg as, you know, a comedian called Steve Coogan in the UK. He used to go on tour with him and just do a little bit on his stage show. And so I've watched all these comedians over the years do all these bits and pieces. And so I'm always very interested in those sort of creative people. I think with music for me, I'm sorry, I'm laboring your question now massively.
No, please do.
But I think with musicians, music in particular, as a musician, you're taught, or as part of the journey, you analyze music to a great degree. You can't help but listen to a piece of music and go, oh, what's going on there? What's that doing there? What's that doing there? That's interesting. What's that going? Whereas an artist, I mean, I went to art college, but I would never class myself as a gifted artist in the same way that someone like Roger Dean is. You know, and I'd say to friends when I was at art college, I'd say, God, I wish I could draw like you. You just draw things amazingly. And they would turn around to me and say, yeah, we wish we could play the piano like you, but we can't do that. And you sort of go, oh, okay, I get it. You've got an ability for that discipline that you are just able to do. And I remember sharing a flat years ago with a mate of mine, and he was an artist. And I remember saying to him, he said, what do you want me to draw? I said, oh, I know. Can you draw a soldier on a battlement? And his first question to me was, what expression do you want on his face? And to me, my idea was, God, if I could just get the face looking like a face and like a real person in proportion, that would be a real achievement. And he'd gone that extra level. And he said to me, yeah, but you do the same thing musically. You don't just play C to F. You make the music flow in a way around those chords that they're almost like they don't exist anymore. You've just created something around it. It's exactly the same thing. And because I can't draw to that level, and I'll tell my wife I'm the funniest man in the world, but you have people out there that are genuinely just make you belly laugh because they're so clever and quick with what they say.
Yes.
Those people I sort of have a sort of not a worship, but a real admiration for, because it's not something I do. And so I just really admire that creative approach to get to the top of their world as well. And I love sitting down with Rodney and watching him paint something or draw something. And he did it the other day. He came over here and my son was saying, how do you draw, Rodney? And he said, I just sit down and draw. He said, what do you want me to draw? And my son was there. This is my son's 16 now, but it was about 4 years ago when he was about 12. And he said to Rodney, he said, I want an elephant's trunk and I want the legs of a kangaroo. And Rodney was there just drawing this thing. And I've got it in the cupboard here. We're going to get it framed. It's just these little sketches that Rodney just drew with my son's imagination throwing stuff at him. And he just had this ability to do it. And I think that's why when you asked me who would I like to talk to, I'm lucky enough the artists that I would have said I'm friends with so I can talk to.
Right.
But people like John Cleese, Kelsey Grammer, Stephen Fry, I haven't met yet, and I would really dearly like to do that, because I'd get the usual bit of the first half hour of me just going, oh, I love everything you do, it's terrific. And then hopefully after I'd gone past my little bit of fandom, I could start talking to them properly.
That's great. I love it. And I think you've done so much in your career too. With your talents and things like that, is there something on a bucket list that you have, where something that you've always wanted to do, be it a musical goal or a personal goal, or a place you would want to go, or anything on that, that tops your list that you'd absolutely want to do?
It's tricky, isn't it? I did have a bucket list, and again, I've been, I've been very lucky in my career that I have, because of the work that I've done, I've been able to tick an awful lot of things off my list that maybe a lot of people in their lives wouldn't ever get to do. So, when I was younger, I always said, oh, I wanted to put an album out by the time I was 30, and I managed to put my first record out in my early 20s. And by the time I got to 30, I'd done 6 or 7 of them. And then there was always, oh, I'd really like to, do a show with my own music. And I was lucky enough to tick that one off. And then it was like, well, I'd really like to do a show in a theatre. And then I ticked that one off. And then it was like, and then you create sort of bucket list items, which are almost like challenges, not just things I'd like to do. It's like, I've never done a solo piano show. I'd really like to do that. And so I ended up doing some solo piano shows where you try and carry a show on your own. And so they're sort of bucket list stroke challenges. And I was lucky enough to sort of push myself into those sort of things that may be slightly out of your comfort zone. And then touring with Yes and Straubs and Bob Catley and all these different people, I've been to so many different places that I otherwise would never have seen. So I've been lucky enough to do those. I think if I had other bucket list items, it would be, I'm working on something of mine, which is a big project, which I can't say too much about at the moment, but I would really like to see that come to fruition. I'd like to have something of my own that was really established, that I could really say that defines me. That's the one thing I'd really like to do, which is my next bucket list item. And there's other places in the world that I've never played that I'd love to go and play. I'm always getting asked whether I'm going to go and play down in New Zealand. I've got some friends in New Zealand and Australia, and it's such a long way away, but I'd love to do it. I love the idea in Japan and some of these far-flung places that I've never actually got to play. I'd like to think that I'd get to do those at some point before I pass on. So those are the sort of things that are left in my bucket list. And I still have the same things that most people have in their bucket list, which is that they want to, grow up, and if you have children, you want to see your children do well and prosper and have a level of security in life. It's for me, it's not all. As I've got older, I've become less. I'll probably like to have at least 3 speedboats. As I've got older, that sort of childhood sort of what is success has kind of gone to be replaced with a more of a, okay, have I created a catalogue of work that I'm proud of? That's more important to me now.
Right.
And have I created something that my children, when I'm gone, will be able to listen to and go, oh, I really like hearing Dad. That to me has become more important than the, yes, well, I want to have a yacht and this sort of stuff. I've sort of moved away from that. I mean, somebody gives me a yacht, I'm not going to turn around and say no.
I would
we all still, we all still have, we all have things that we'd like to do that would make our lives more comfortable. But I have a more grounded approach, I think, particularly as I've got older. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, it probably would have been a completely different set of things. But as I've got older, it's become maybe a little bit more, what's the right word? I suppose maybe slightly less materialistic as I've got older. I still want the same things other people do. I want a bigger house and like a different car, all the stuff that everybody goes through in life.
Right.
But no, I think those sort of longer term things are just as important now.
Yeah, and I can relate with that for sure. That is definitely an age thing, I think, and children for sure. And you mentioned your son, 16 now. Are we going to get more Wakemans down the line? Does he play?
He does play. Yeah, he's a very good pianist. Actually, he's developing his own style. He plays very well. Plays differently to me, actually, which is quite interesting, because I watch him play sometimes and I'll sit and sort of work out what he's done and go, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting way of doing things. But then he comes from a different different generation of music listening. He doesn't listen to the same sort of music that I listen to. He's very influenced by computer game music. So he listens to, you know, the game music now, and watches people online talking about game music. And you know, computer gaming music has developed so much over the years, and he gets really excited by that. And he, you know, he often comes up and says, "Oh, Dad, listen to this." And, oh, really again? And I sort of think, God, you're being a dreadful father. Just listen to the music. But you know, I try to explain to him, as you get older, you've got less time left, and so you tend to want to listen to the things that you want to listen to rather than discover loads of new stuff. But he is, you know, no, he's a very good little musician, and I'm sort of trying to pass on some of my knowledge to him, which is played with as many people as you can. I mean, as we've just gone through lockdown, he said, "Oh, what shall I do next?" I said, "Well, when you get back into the classroom, sit down with another musician, get a bass player, get a guitarist, find a drummer, sit down and just work through something." And he did his very first show the other day at school for a parents' open evening, where they had to play Mr. Blue Sky. And he came back to me afterwards and he was like, "Yeah, I played with the band. It was great." And
That's
we did
great.
really well. And he was really chuffed. And I said, "It's great, isn't it, playing with other people?" He was like, "Yeah, it's really, really, you know, having to listen to everybody else." And, you know, it was great. It was really nice. So,
That is
yes,
great.
yeah, he's a good player. But I keep saying the same thing to him. It's a difficult industry. So don't think about the red carpet or the fans or anything. Think about what you want to do and do what you love. And if it leads you somewhere, then great. That's the most important thing as a musician, is doing what you think is you. You know, be an artist.
Yeah.
That's the important thing.
Yeah. That's just great to hear. And it's great to hear that he enjoys it.
Yeah.
You know, it's that, and that's really, I think, could you do this if you didn't enjoy it? You know, I mean, as great as, you know, you've become and learned, and, you know, if you weren't enjoying what you were doing, I don't know if that, I think that comes through in the music, you know?
I think so. I think it's the same as most things. If you do something just for the money, that's fine. You know, lots of people make living through doing music for money and paying, you know, some of the greatest classical composers in the world. They're living by doing music for kings and queens that, you know, ask them to write stuff. So, you know, we all need a financial reward for doing what we do, because otherwise we can't do it. That's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for people that buy the records, because without them buying the records, I can't do another one, and that's what I like doing.
Right.
But the creative part of it has to come from the right place. I would never sit down and write a record and go, right, I need to write a record now to earn some money. I just know that I wouldn't write something that was worthy of the sort of catalogue of work that I've tried to create. Even the albums where I've done, somebody has come to me and said, "I want to put a commissioned album out." I did 2 commissioned albums, one based on the Chakras, which was a new age album. And I did so much research into that and understanding about how that worked, because I wanted to do it properly. Even though somebody had said to me, I'd like you to write this album for me," I could have just sat down and knocked anything out and said, "Oh, that's called this, that's called that." But it didn't work for me that way. I had to do it the right way. I had to make it mean something. And it was really interesting, actually, because that album I really enjoyed writing. And when I delivered it, I was so proud of it. And I consider it a solo album. So much so that actually we had it playing when my son was born. It was a piece of music we had playing when my son was born. So my son was born to that piece of that album.
Beautiful.
So, you know, so even when you're commissioned to write something, you still put your heart and soul into it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's massively important. But, you know, every artist is different, and I would never ever judge how another artists make their living or enjoy doing their work. You know, it's the whole point of it. It's a bit like the tree thing I said before. We're all different.
Yeah.
We all take a different path.
Yeah.
And as long as you're happy doing what you do and you enjoy it, and it gives you a satisfaction on some level, then, you know, music at the end of the day makes somebody happy. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it sure is. And your music makes many, many, many people happy. We appreciate you for sure.
Oh, thank you.
You know, and I feel like I've disrespected your time. You have given me so much time. This has been such a absolute pleasure. Speaking with you is an absolute honor. It's great. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. No, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you ever so much for calling. It's been great.
Yeah. Are you going to you're gonna tour? Will you make it out to to Chicago? I'm in Chicago here, and I know that's a long way away, and touring right now is kind of the logistics of all of that. But
Yeah,
would you like to tour? Are you planning to tour at some point?
I'd love to tour again. I love the road. I love I love traveling. I like meeting people. I love the whole thing about being a musician. Um, there's not so much planned for this year. I think this year we're still sort of coming out of lockdown really and seeing how the world is going to react to it. But this project that I'm working on, if that comes to fruition, then that will lead to something next year, I think, which we will then hopefully take around the world. So if it all comes good, then yes, I'll see you in Chicago.
That would be great. I can't wait. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Oliver, thank you so much. I
It's a
so
pleasure.
appreciate you.
No,
And let's talk again when you get the new project coming out and you're getting ready to tour for sure.
excellent. Keep in
All
touch.
right. All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.